because I'm speaking after you. Do I need to sit closer or?
Yeah, you're getting picked up on the mic,
Okay.
so. Hi. Thank you everyone for coming. Those of you here and those of you at home. This is our panel discussion on the sandwich generation, dealing with aging parents. Um, we hope you enjoy. Just a brief introduction of each of our panelists. Heather Keene is a director at Visiting Angels, an organization that provides living assistance all over Fairfield County. Meredith Sheen is a realtor with Keller Williams, and Barbara Coutine is a partner at the Trust and Estates Practice Group here in Stamford. So, without any further ado, here's the presentation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Meredith Shine, and we'd like to welcome you to our first panel for the sandwich generation dealing with aging parents. So I'd like to start by telling you how this came about. Barbara Coutine and myself were having coffee. And I said to Barbara, I have so many friends that are dealing with aging parents. And I had dealt with it myself as well before my parents passed. And I just feel so emotional for them. It's the most overwhelming time where there's no map, there's no way to navigate it. You feel like you're in water that you don't know what to swim with and how to do it. And I said to Barbara, it'd be great if somehow people could give people tools and what to do. So we started chatting, and I thought of Heather, and she's over here, which you'll hear from both of them later. And we came up with this fabulous panel. And ironically, a little while later, when we were planning this, I had a friend of mine, and her mom was in the hospital. And I happened to say, I'm coming over, you need help. Next thing we knew, she gets a call. She thought her mom would be in the hospital for a little bit. You have 24 hours, you need full time care. Someone has to live there. Well, she didn't have that. The look on her face, I get emotional, ready to cry. And that's everything why we're here. But before I introduce one of my panelists that will go next, Barbara, what I love about our panel, and I already knew both these ladies, but introducing them is we do our business from the heart. We take care of our clients, we treat them like family. We're not just transactional. This means something to us. And we want these relationships to mean something to all the people we work with. So Barbara and I met when I was doing paperwork for my family to get us in line with what we needed. But I wish I would have had Barbara when my parents were alive because I didn't have the documents that Barbara's going to talk to you about now. So without further ado, here is Barbara Coutine.
Thank you, Meredith. So I'm here to discuss the legal issues involved with assisting parents who are elderly. And we called this discussion the sandwich generation, dealing with aging parents. So before we get into the substance, we want to understand what is the sandwich generation. Sandwich generation is people who are dealing with caring for children and parents at the same time. So you have PTO meetings you're trying to get to, sports events you're trying to attend for your children. At the same time, you've got doctor's appointments and grocery shopping to help your parents with. It's hard enough taking care of ourselves, and having to care for younger family members and older family members too can be overwhelming even for the best multitaskers. So with that, we can go to the next slide. The purpose of today's panel is to help you feel better prepared to deal with issues involving older family members you may be caring for. Having to care for parents does not happen overnight. Remember, these are the people who raised you, so they were independent and taking care of themselves until at some point they're no longer independent and they need your assistance. And it's a gradual process. You need to be watching for the warning signs. There's definitely an issue that people don't like to admit that they need help. And I don't think that we like to admit that our parents need help. We want to believe that they're able to do everything for themselves as long as possible. So here are just a couple of things on the slide that you might be noticing. Maybe dad missed a few car payments. Maybe the insurance is no longer on the car. Mom might have had a minor fender bender. These are things that might seem minor in the moment, but when all of these things start happening, you need to take a step back and realize something more serious is going on here. Maybe mom fell, broke her wrist, but the next time it could be a much more serious accident. So you need to start paying attention to those signs. I want to tell you a little story about a client of mine that, seemed to be doing relatively well, just having a few little minor memory issues. And a friend of hers told me she wanted to update her estate plan. I went to meet with her. She seemed a little bit forgetful, but generally with it enough. We made some changes to the documents, went back, met with her, had her sign, and she seemed a little bit less coherent that day. We got a geriatric care manager involved to help out and see really what is going on here. When the geriatric care manager went to meet with this woman, she answered the door in the nude. So clearly there was something going on there. I personally didn't see it, so you do need to get those professionals involved. So as your parent starts becoming forgetful, maybe having some physical issues, getting to the bank, the mailbox, the store, list goes on, you want to have the legal authority to do what you need to do to help them out. So you ought to consult an estate planning attorney early on in the process. Losing capacity is a slow process, and initially you might only need to ask your mom or dad, are your bills getting paid, and remind them. But eventually you're going to see that maybe they're paying bills twice. Maybe they can't find the checkbook. So all of those are small warning signs that you need to be paying attention to. And it's certainly better to address these issues sooner while mom and dad are healthy rather than waiting until it's too late. And we'll get to what happens if it is too late. So when people hear the term estate planning, typically they think about a will or what happens to your assets at death. But most estate planning attorneys will prepare other documents in addition to a will that addresses what happens to your assets at death. In my opinion, those documents, which are called advance directives, are even more important than your will. The will's going to deal with what happens to your assets when you're dead, but you're dead then. The advance directives are going to decide who's going to make medical decisions and financial decisions for you while you're alive. And I think that's something that we all want to make sure we've got the right person doing those things. So the power of attorney deals with financial affairs. That's primarily the person who's going to take care of paying your bills, managing your finances, making sure your house is maintained. You also would want to have a healthcare representative, and that's the person who's going to make medical decisions for you when you can't do that for yourself. I believe we should be the ones deciding who's going to make those decisions for us if we should become incapacitated. Generally, if you're married, that might be your spouse, the person you would want to have. It's likely, however, that your spouse is maybe similar in age to you and might also be having some medical issues at the same time that you're having medical issues or capacity issues. So you want to pick somebody beyond the spouse, and making that decision as to who's going to be your proxy can be difficult. It's important that you realize the person who might make financial decisions for you on the power of attorney doesn't have to be the same person that would make medical decisions for you. So you might have one child who's in the medical profession, a doctor or nurse, physical therapist. They would probably be a good person to choose to be your healthcare representative. If you have a banker or an accountant in the family, maybe that's the person you should name to be your power of attorney. No hard and fast rules about who you should be naming, but you really should make that decision. And sometimes making that decision delays getting the documents prepared and signed. What I advise clients is it's better to have an imperfect choice than to have no choice at all. So if you don't make a choice and you should become incapacitated, then you're going to end up in court and you're going to have a conservatorship proceeding. That's something that we do everything we can to avoid that for clients. Even when someone's capacity is questionable, we'll do what we can if we have a cohesive family to come to an agreement about who ought to be named on that document and get to see the client in what we call that moment of lucidity so that they can actually sign a power of attorney or a healthcare proxy. In the conservatorship situation, the judge is going to decide who's going to make those decisions for you. Can end up being a battle, can be expensive. The conservator's actions are then subject to the court's oversight, so you have less privacy than you would if you have the power of attorney and healthcare proxy already signed in advance. So those are important things that you should consider. One of the other issues that delays things or makes things complicated in deciding who ought to be on those documents is you've got 3 kids and you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I don't want to choose my son over my daughter, and have them think I'm sexist, whatever it might be. Can tell you in doing this for about 20 years, more than 20 years, nobody has ever said to me, thanks, mom and dad. I'm so glad you named me power of attorney. I'm so glad I have this responsibility. So don't worry about hurting anybody's feelings. Pick the person that has the knowledge, experience, the personality, and geographically lives locally or can get where they need to be able to serve in the capacity you need them to. So now that we've talked about what the legal documents are, we're going to talk about some of the care options. I'm going to turn it over to Heather Keene from Visiting Angels, and she's going to discuss what different things might be available for individuals. And I also just want to reiterate some of the kind words that Meredith said. Heather truly cares about her clients, and it's not just a question of getting a client, but really making sure that you do the right thing for that client. And that's what, I've learned in dealing with Heather. So I will now turn it over to Heather.
Thanks very much, Barbara. I appreciate that intro. Hello, everyone. I'm Heather, and as Barbara and Meredith mentioned, my family and I own a home care agency, Visiting Angels. So it's all day, every day that we are getting those frantic calls from adult children. Mom just fell, dad just broke his hip. What's the next step? Or maybe mom's a little isolated, needs a little bit more interaction. What are our options? So I'm here today just to talk to you about a couple of options. This isn't everything, but just a good starting place, for mom and dad or for a loved one, just getting them into a better position. The first one is if mom and dad are isolated at home, plugging them into a local senior center. We saw this a lot during COVID. There was a lot of isolation during COVID, a lot of loneliness, and people just not being plugged into the community, not having friends. Maybe a lot of their friends have passed away. But just to give you an example, the Stanford Senior Center right around the corner from us, they were operating all during COVID. I think they might have closed their doors for possibly a month, but they operated over Zoom. They have different exercise programs, different programs, meals for seniors if they need meals delivered to their homes. They can even go food shopping for seniors as well. So transportation and a really great community with the senior center. Greenwich Senior Center down on Greenwich Avenue, also another great local resource. Again, operating during COVID with Zoom, they would have Zumba over Zoom, different exercise programs, again, seniors for meals for seniors, Thanksgiving drive-by meals, everything, you name it. So plugging, looking up your local senior center chapter and plugging mom and dad into that is a great starting point. I'll talk a little bit about assisted living. Assisted living is a great option for mom and dad if they want to remain in a vibrant community with others, having that interaction with others, having their meals already prepped for, having programs in place. They take seniors out into the community. They also have dancing and arts and crafts and everything right in the assisted living location, which is great. One thing about assisted livings is that if mom or dad or your loved one does need that one-on-one care, such as they might be a flight risk, maybe they have advanced dementia and they're not comfortable in their new location. If they do need that one-on-one care, that is something to consider when moving them into assisted living. We are most of the time in seniors individual homes, but we're also in assisted living too if they need that one-on-one care. So just something to consider with an assisted living move. But again, a great option for seniors. My own grandmother, for example, was in assisted living. My grandfather passed away very early at 54. My grandmother at the time, we had her in assisted living. We ended up, when my parents started this business, we ended up moving her into my parents' home about 10 years ago. And she was so used to being in that assisted living environment, having people all around all the time, that even though we had our best caregivers with her to stimulate her during the day, she would wake up and say, "Where is everybody?" So it's not a one size fits all for everyone. But again, if mom or dad or a loved one does need that one-on-one care, just something to consider when moving into assisted living. That might be an additional cost to have home care in addition. As mentioned, my family and I own a home care agency. This is really a good option for seniors who want to age in place. So if they're wed to their home, which a lot of people are, they don't, they grew up in the home or they've been there for 40 years and they don't want to leave. Aging in place is a great option. we bring the care into the home. So we basically hire either certified nursing assistants or home health aides, bringing them into the home, helping out with, we call ADLs, activities of daily living. So that's helping in and out of the shower, helping get dressed, personal care, meal prep, transportation, medication reminders, that kind of thing, just to set them up for the day. And when you look into home care options, most home care agencies do have a minimum of about maybe 4 hours a day, 6 hours a day. And then anywhere from hourly care to a live-in. So that's someone who's actually a caregiver would come in the home and live in the home with mom or dad full time. So, anything ranging within those parameters. And again, things transition, mom and dad could start with a certain amount of hours. Remember that you're in the driver's seat. So if mom or dad are starting with a certain amount of hours of care, you can always scale back if they're getting better or if you're seeing improvement. You can always make that call. Adult daycare centers are another great option for seniors. We actually partner a lot with a couple of adult daycare centers in town, one of them being River House and Coscob. A lot of our clients will go to River House during the day, and then at night we might help them with meals and getting ready for bed. But adult daycare centers are fantastic. They're mostly with seniors that have some sort of dementia. It's a great respite for families. So during the day, it gives mom or dad a place to go and gives that family member some respite. They have games, they have activities, they take them out. Usually a meal is included with the adult daycare center. So a really good option. And then finally, the last point is if mom or dad do end up in a hospital, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the progression. So let's say mom or dad fall and they break a hip, they'll end up in the hospital for a certain amount of days. If I think it might be over 3 days, if they're in a hospital for over 3 days, they qualify for Medicare will kick in and cover a certain amount of time in a skilled nursing facility after that. Subacute rehab in order to get better. They'll be getting physical therapy, occupational therapy, nursing right in the skilled nursing facility, which is fantastic. So making sure that you look into those options for what Medicare does cover for mom and dad. And then also when they do get discharged, they typically will go home with a medical agency. That's medical home care. We run a non-medical agency. Typically medical agencies are covered under Medicare. So that will include physical therapy, occupational therapy, nursing. Those are people that actually come to the home and they provide continuous care for your loved one in the home to make sure that they're getting stronger. And we typically will partner with those medical home care agencies. We provide the non-medical care, activities of daily living. They come in for a couple hours a week and they provide the ongoing physical therapy. So just a couple things to consider. And as mentioned before, there is no one size fits all with this model. Just a couple of examples of clients that we've had that have either progressed out of certain, out of the care that they currently had. They got better. They ended up transitioning to different models. But we did have when my parents first started the agency 10 years ago, one of their first clients they had was a gentleman that had advanced dementia. He was a flight risk. He lived at home with his wife. And he thought that he was, even though he's been retired for 20 years, he would get dressed every morning as if he was going to work. And he had 2 different kinds of socks on, 2 different kinds of shoes. He was dressed in a suit and tie, and he thought he was going to work. My parents ended up signing them on as clients. We had a great caregiver with him during the day, a male, tried to entertain him as much as possible. We would take him out, we would help him with activities of daily living, with redirection, a little bit with his dementia, but he still wasn't really sleeping at night, and the funds were limited with that family. The wife was burning out. So what we did was we made the recommendation for adult daycare center for River House. And this ended up being a really good fit for this family. There was actually a little bus that comes and picks him up and picks up a lot of the clients every day. Our client thought he was going to work. So he would board the bus every morning, go to the adult daycare center. They had him doing a bunch of activities. He would come home at night. And so that ended up being a better model for him. We kept him at night. We helped him with dinner. We helped him with meal prep and getting him ready for bed. But that adult daycare center was really the best fit for him during the day. And another example I just wanted to give briefly was making sure that you are an advocate for your loved one in their coordination of care. An example of this is we had one client that was a 2-person assist for a Hoyer lift. So pretty much bedbound. Needed a Hoyer lift is basically a machine that helps people get in and out of out of bed. The mechanical Hoyer lifts require 2 caregivers. Again, this was another family with limited funding. And again, 2 caregivers is obviously more expensive than 1 caregiver. So we ended up starting the case with 2 caregivers to operate the manual Hoyer lift. We ended up working with the medical team that was with him and coming in, that medical agency that was coming in, helping with the physical therapy, the OT, and the family. They ended up getting a Sarah lift, which is a sit to stand lift. Requires a little bit of strength from the client, but from the patient, but eventually with the help of the medical team, the family members that were involved in our care, this person was able to transition to a Sarah lift, which brought it back down to 1 person, 1 caregiver. Didn't need the Hoyer lift, was no longer really bedbound, was regaining their strength. And great news for the family, great news for the client himself. He was regaining his strength. So really being an advocate for your loved one, making sure that you're following the medical agency, you're keeping on top of the physical therapists, keeping on top of doctor's visits to help your loved one get stronger. And I guess the moral of the story is always doing what is best for your loved one. There's no one size fits all. And with that in mind, I want to flip it over to Meredith. Meredith Shine, we've known Meredith for a long time. When she and her husband were first working, they owned a chocolate store in Darien. All of our chocolate came from their store. All of our advertisement chocolate came from them. We've been working with them for a long time. Meredith, I call Meredith the mayor in town. She knows everybody in Fairfield County, but she's now working with Keller Williams, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about prepping one's home in order to make that eventual move.
Thank you, Heather, for that wonderful introduction. And what Heather said about taking care of your loved ones, it's interesting how we're all in different professions, that I started by saying I wanted to bring us all together tonight. But the common thread of taking care of your loved ones also enters in when you're moving, because when you're moving can be a whole other stressful, whether it's aging or not. Moving is just overwhelming and stressful, period. And what I try to do with my clients is really a team approach. I try to handhold, be there for every step of the way, guide them, give them tips, give them strategies, and just try to give them comfort that we will get through the move and we will do it together. And what I have tonight that I'm going to run through, I found a great article that really gives top-notch strategies. And if someone would like me to email it to them, I can do that too after. One is just start early, because it takes a lot longer than you realize. It could take 2 or 3 months to start planning that move and devise a plan. It's not just, picking a realtor, picking where you're moving. It's, you know, going in steps. One that I found that was really interesting, and I was reading this to the ladies when we were kind of laying out a little bit of what we were saying tonight. It was documenting your favorite setups in your house. Take some photos of how you have it laid out and what you like about where you live. And we thought this could be really helpful if someone has any memory loss, because then they're going to feel more comfortable in their new surroundings. This one I thought we could all use, but discard duplicates. So I came up with, I don't know why I came up with whisk as an example. I don't even know if people have whisks in their drawer, but like, how many duplicate things do we have in our house? So start by getting rid of things that you have duplicates of. I was practicing my speech for my husband, and he liked this one. Adopt the 1 year rule. He's like, can we do that? If you haven't used something in a year, and obviously the theme tonight was more aging parents, but again, take some of this for any age. But part of what I'm going to run through too is, so you're going to your parents and you're visiting. What about not waiting till it gets the crunch time and, oh my God, in the panic moment? What about when you're there using these things, this 1 year rule, this duplicate? What about starting it early? Consolidating collections. If you have like 10 of the same mug, do you need that? So do your parents need that? A yes and no pile. This one really hit home for me out of all of them. It says get help from your family, but in a totally different way than that sounds. When both my parents died within 5 months, and I'm sitting in their closet and sitting in their room, and finding God knows what memories. And now I don't know who the pictures are. I don't know in the albums, and I don't know all the stories. So, what I came up with in my speech tonight, if you could do this with your parents when they're alive and start going through what they have in the house with yourself, your kids, it would be get emotional. It would be like the best memory that you went through it now. And on top of it, it helps you organize when they're going to move. Even if they're not ready now, you've done it. Host a yard sale or an estate sale or a tag sale. That's something I can help with. That's the nice thing when you have a realtor. The realtor can easily set you up with any of these. So that's some tips that I have for that. Then the next slide is about moving tips for seniors. This one says plan for a safe moving day. And what that means is when you're putting the boxes in different places, have a path so no one falls, no one gets hurt. Plan with your parents that they're not going to lift stuff that they shouldn't be lifting. Again, I think this transfers to all of us because I never thought of that, but have a space where your boxes aren't taking every space in the room. Keep track of important documents. This one also hit home a little because I'd walk in, and this is a true story. Every time I'd visit my mom, she'd greet me at the door. The Wills and W under the accordion file. Let me take you to the jewelry. Every single time. It was morbid. But then it was like, Mom. But then when she died, the first thing I knew to do was go there. So it's so important that you know where the documents are. And of course, I'm talking about moving when they're alive, but what I'm saying is documents can get lost. You don't know where things are. And this is also something that, although moving, like we said, gets in 1 or 2 months, this could be something now. That's why I keep stressing these don't have to be last minute. This could be something someone's watching this, you're seeing your parents soon, ask where the documents are. Because there's so many things in their house, you just don't know where they are, except for my mom. Then there was prepare an essential bag. And this was interesting. It was like, if you're moving, have something with some kitchen stuff to prepare, have something with things to sleep with, have something with medication, but have a bag of your essential items separate than where all your boxes and everything, and then you can't find anything. And focus on what's being gained, not lost, because everybody has a tendency, especially if it's your house you've lived in for so long. But this was an interesting one. It said, you know what? If you have to maintain the property and you're older and you can't shovel and you can't do the gardening and you can't do the mowing, why don't you look at, wow, I can see my kids more. I can see my friends. I can do a hobby. You're gaining. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't reminisce and have your moment, because I think a lot of times, it's hard to not have your moment, and people have to own you're moving and it's a transition. Take time to get adjusted to your new neighborhood. But on the other hand, this was interesting too. People can get so overwhelmed that they kind of go in their shell when they move and they don't remember to stay connected to their family and friends and loved ones. So that is my presentation, but I have a little more because I'm the closer, just like I was the introducer. So before I close, because I knew these two women and they did not know each other, we each had different roles, which is kind of really nice in teamwork. And I felt like my role, which is a little side note, because Heather was our tech girl and Barbara was great at getting us to the library. We all of a sudden decided to do this and we had nowhere to be. And Barbara gets an email. She's like, we can do it at the library. So we all have gotten to know each other well. The only difference I have, because I said I work directly with Barbara, is I work directly with Heather. So I just want to tell what I feel is a great story. And ironically, Heather just told me she saw my mother-in-law today, who is a client of hers. So this gets very personal because my mother-in-law needed an aide. And My husband and his brothers weren't sure what to do. And it's funny when you're in prior businesses and they used to make chocolate business cards with us. So I used to see visiting angels all over my chocolate store. And I called Heather. And what I said about Barbara listening and taking me through steps in all of our jobs, we really have to listen, be patient, understand the client. And in Heather's job, they're placing someone in this house where she lives. So they've got to get a good fit of who my mother-in-law needs. And it's going to say cliche, but it's called Visiting Angels. And they gave her an angel. Her name is Susie. Susie is there Monday to Friday. And this is being recorded. So maybe I'll show this to Susie, little ad lib. But Susie says to me one day, I don't want to leave her. I leave her on the weekends. I miss her. I miss mom. I need to make sure she's okay. Susie puts the meal in the fridge for the weekend people, labels everything for them, writes me what they should feed her, checks on her, and makes sure she's good over the weekend. Susie cooks these beautiful meals and sends them to me so I could see, sends me pictures of her eating. Then I call Susie, and it's my mother-in-law's birthday, and I forgot to tell her. And it's a Sunday night. Oh no, we've got to get her to the salon tomorrow. Who's open on a Monday? We've got to make her feel special for the day. And Susie smiles when she smiles. She makes her feel so loved and so special. We feel blessed to know visiting angels and that they're in our lives. And I guess what I want to end with is how I started saying, I hope you felt our hearts, what we do with our clients. I hope you learned because my reason for doing this was to give you tools in your toolbox so that you don't feel that helpless, overwhelmed feeling I started with, where you just want to crawl up and you don't know who to turn to and where to go. And you know you have to take care of your parents. So we're giving you these wonderful resources. We have our information. If you're on Zoom, we have her cards here. So we will open for questions and please reach out to any of us if you need help. Thank you.
Thank you.
So oh, here. Go ahead. Exactly, yeah, because otherwise I'm going to hear you at home.
Thank you. So I'll endorse another dimension of what you're all about. So I know you're all great within your specialties. And it's a wonderful thing if the senior in question wants to go along with getting your estate plan done, downsizing, seeking care. I was lucky. My mom and dad passed away 20 years ago. They sold the house. They got rid of all their stuff. They moved into an apartment. Settling their estate was easy. Then we have people like my wife who didn't want to downsize, won't get rid of her stuff. I joke to the kids, all that stuff in the attic, when we, mom goes first, that stuff's leaving. So to your point, these are conversations that a child, baby boomer, needs to have with their parents at some point, but not all the parents are willing to listen. And I would encourage the audience, don't go down that road by yourself. Reach out to each of you and your specialties. Like, I know my mom needs to downsize or at least clean up, but I can't get her to do it. I imagine you could help with that.
Yes.
I know my parents need to sign the incapacity documents, but they're afraid of their mortality. And so they don't want, and I'm sure you can help with that. And then I'm sure you can help in your specialty. So I would just encourage people to reflect on who they're dealing with, because not all the seniors want to go along. End of commercial.
That is very, very true.
We always say that family doesn't really listen to family, but they listen to third parties. And I could vouch for that too, in my own family. So it's exactly. Well said.
And actually, along those lines, as bringing in the home health aides, I have to imagine that there's a lot of them that get fired by the person receiving care. So you're sending in a replacement and it might take a few tries before you get the Susie.
Right,
That'll work
right.
out really well.
And actually, my mom's in the audience, but she calls this a matchmaking service that we run. It really is. I mean, it's, we got to make sure that it's a good fit. And we've been there where we've gotten kicked out. People with advanced Alzheimer's agree yesterday that they want care. We start the care. What's she doing here? And we get the boot, but we've seen all types. Absolutely. Yeah.
I can attest, and not Heather's service, claim my parents were on Long Island, but we got care for both my mom and dad. And then I call and they're watching a movie and I'm like, oh, where's the aide? Oh, we sent her home. We don't need her. So, yeah, so I'm sure that happens. Yeah. So then the kids have to your point. Um, and it's interesting when my husband and his family knew they needed someone. I made the intro and my husband knew Heather, but not in the role. But yes, Heather took over and explained how and what would transfer because we didn't really know. I mean, I knew from the short time with my parents, but again, I think it's a learning curve because you don't know how it's going to work, how many hours, like you said, the weekend people versus the Monday. It's a lot of transitioning. And with my mother-in-law, she doesn't really totally tell us. I mean, yes, like I said, she loves Susie, but sometimes we won't always hear. And it's just us figuring out how everything's working, I guess, and communicating with Heather for her. Like, do you find the kids like, do you really talk? I guess that's a good question. Like you said about your mother-in-law. I guess I'm getting to it. Do you really talk to the actual patients as much as their kids since it's sandwich generation?
Right. Good question. It depends on the client. I mean, some people they don't, their son or daughter might be lined up to be power of attorney. Dealing with somebody right now where the father is 98, still alert and oriented and a little confused here and there, but his daughter is she's set up to be power of attorney, but she doesn't have that yet because he's still alert and oriented and he's still making decisions. We have to walk him through the process multiple times to remind him the decisions that he's making. But most of the time we are dealing with the sons and daughters to Meredith's point, it's and changes in schedule. Exactly. Exactly. And this daughter, for example, wants to be power of attorney yesterday for dad, but dad's still making decisions and they don't always get along. So, right. Oh, that's true too. Mhm.
I have a question on that then, because my mom didn't want to give me power of attorney. We discussed, she wanted control, she wanted everything. And that's why I said, I wish I had Barbara. And I wish I would have had it for a lot of reasons because my father had passed. She needed more than she would admit. But like someone like the reason I'm asking that person, it sounds like you do a little bit of a fine dance because how do you convince them that patient? It's like, how would you really get them to give their child, like it's hard. How do you convince them they need someone like Barbara? Because he's still, like you said, how does that happen, I guess?
To be honest, we don't really get too involved in that conversation just because we want to kind of keep our lines.
Right. So you have to
but-
keep, yeah.
But I think recommending Barbara services is huge. I mean, just recommending, we have to draw the line with finances. Obviously, we can't get involved in people's finances, our caregivers, and then also anything legal too. So we're always making recommendations to the adult children, have that conversation with a trust and estate attorney.
And I
sooner
think
rather
you
than
would
later.
probably
Yeah.
have a similar conversation with the parent to say, if you don't make a decision, you don't name someone as power of attorney, then you're going to end up in court with a conservatorship. And that's expensive. And usually the price tag is enough to convince somebody to sign a document, but it
That's
can be
interesting.
difficult. Yes.
Right.
Yes. So, but it definitely can be challenging.
And I guess I'll be the MC with the question, but I have a question. for Barbara. I've never done this wrong. No, but in all seriousness, with us doing this tonight and sandwich generation and my feeling, my friends that are truly in this, how this came up, it's probably a tricky question, Barbara, but like I only came to you because my parents didn't have what I needed them to have. So either a typical age, I know this is kind of a tricky question, but at what does it make sense to start doing, not just aging, like I feel like so many people just don't think to have this in order,
So I think it's something, obviously, none of us like to face our own mortality. So a lot of clients don't want to come talk to me, frankly. But people will come when they have a child. So they want to name a guardian. That's part of the documentation we put together. We also have clients where their children potentially have a fair amount of wealth that they've received from their parents. And the parents want to make sure that that wealth stays within the family and doesn't end up going to a potential ex-son-in-law or ex-daughter-in-law. And that will get them to have their children put some documents in place. So we do planning for clients as young as 18, once you can legally sign, up to, people approaching 100, or as long as they've got their capacity. But basically, anybody who's got some assets ought to be doing some sort of estate planning. Anybody who's concerned about who's going to make medical decisions for them, any of us at any age can be in an accident. So, it usually, something happens like happened with you, that you deal with a tragedy in your family. It prompts you to think about doing the planning for yourself.
Well, I think what's really hard too, one of the documents you do being HIPAA, because again, when I was with my parents and my mom was by herself, I wanted to be able to talk for her, but she didn't want to give up, like one of the that independence. So it gets tricky sometimes the older they get, like you just said with that they don't want to, they think something so, that you can help talk for them. So I guess it's delicate sometimes getting,
Very
know,
delicate. Yeah.
everything, we do in a way, but it's delicate to get, like you said, sometimes people,
Nobody wants to give up that autonomy. And particularly having, it's one thing to say my spouse can make decisions for me. It's another thing to say my child can make decisions for me. And that's difficult.
but then we answer why we did this, because I feel like all of my friends that don't have, everything lined up possibly, and then this Heather knows everything. I feel like everything happens fast. That was part of what we all talked about when they jump to you, jump to Heather, because I feel like everything spirals. And Heather says it happens to her every day.
And then also that move too between, okay, we want to have the equity to sell the house, get the equity from the house and move into assisted living. That's also a fast move too. So you plug in very soon, and it's sometimes that house is on the market because they need the equity now for whatever it is that they need, whether it's assisted living, whether it's rehab, or so I feel like the whole transition between the three of us ends up happening very quickly. Yeah.
I agree. I think, like we said, it's as we all discussed, there's just so many steps on the sandwich generation. And we found out today is National Sandwich Day, but we couldn't bring food to the library. Barbara told me that. But in all seriousness, the reason I segue to that, the sandwich generation, is when the roles change and when we talked about the documents, it just, and letting your child, it just happens fast, and you're not the child anymore, but you are the child. But then nobody gives you a roadmap. That's why we're here, partly as we're, still taking questions and answering, because there, you don't get given that. You just all of a sudden step in it, and no one prepares you really for what you're stepping into. And then it's just here. And, hopefully, if you have any other questions, but we're helping people. That's what we're here for.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank
And
you.
we've
you.
got our contact information if any other further questions come up. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming
Thank
out on National Sandwich Day.
Facebook holiday.